Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening I'm expecting that we're going to cover some topics that people may consider controversial. So brace yourself, because we're joined this evening by Pamela Geller. She has been known as an author, blogger, president of ADFI, and is just knee-deep in all the excitement happening around the country and around the world when it comes to radical Islam and the threat that it possesses for us here in the United States and around the world. Pamela, thanks for joining us this evening.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you literally lay your life on the line daily because of the path that you've chosen to go down. What got you started with kind of sounding the alarm about radical Islam?
I wonder if the path chose me. Prior to 9/11, frankly, I was really very apolitical. I was the quintessential New York City career girl, loved my life, loved my art, my music, my fashion, and I just assumed my freedom. I assumed my freedom. I assumed my freedom was forever. I never gave it a second thought. And on 9/11, my entire premise was shattered. Freedom is not free. Clearly, there is a grave threat to our nation, to our way of life, to our very civilization. And I felt guilty that I didn't know who had attacked the country. And then when I found out who had attacked the country, I felt guilty that I didn't understand why. And so I spent the ensuing years studying Islamic doctrine, jihadic doctrine, Ibn Warwick, Robert Spencer, Bacheor, and increasingly I found the media was silent on the ideology, silent on the motive, and so I would spend more and more time online because that's where everything was, good, bad, and indifferent. And so it was really very organic. First I was commenting on websites that addressed the jihad threat, and someone sent me the template of a blog and said, start blogging. And I'm like, blogging, what's that? And they said, shut up and write. And I did, and the rest is, shall we say, history, because everything comes from the website. Atlas Shrugs, all of the activism, all of the organizations, that's the mothership.
And so what specifically prompted you to continue down that path? I mean, were there specific parts of the doctrine that the mainstream hadn't prepared you to understand? What was it that prevented you from just being quiet and just sticking with the art and fashion and your music and everything else?
Well, there's a threat to this country.
Right.
There's no question about it. And this idea that it is a perversion of the ideology is simply not true. What we're seeing in Boko Haram, in Hamas, in Al-Qaeda, in the Islamic State, in Mujahideen, in all of these jihad groups across the world is authentic. It's authentic Islam. It's pure Islam. It's literal Islam. And once you start studying the history, 1,400 years of jihadi wars, land appropriations, cultural annihilations, and enslavements, you begin to see the true picture of what this threat is, what it means. That doesn't mean there aren't moderate Muslims. We always have to say this, and this is part of, I think, the deception. Of course there are moderate Muslims. There are secular Muslims that don't go to mosque, that don't believe you should, slay the unbelievers wherever you may find them, as is one Quranic chapter and verse. But by the same token, we don't have to pat on the back every Muslim that doesn't want to kill us. There is a movement, there is a global movement, and it is growing with fearsome speed that want very much to kill us, that want very much to conquer us, and they mean to do it. Now, you can avoid reality, but you cannot avoid the consequences of avoiding reality. And we're seeing that now with the incredible rise of the Islamic State.
Right, and so the Islamic State is in the news quite regularly these days, lopping off people's heads, etc. But the question is there a real threat here? A lot of us are lulled into this belief that, oh yeah, that's just happening in another part of the world. It could never happen here. But We're seeing evidence.
But it is happening here. I mean, there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than violent jihad. And of course, listen, this is what my website does. It reports on national jihad activity and international terrorism. And we have thwarted hundreds and hundreds of attacks since 9/11. Some people know about the Christmas tree lighting bomber, the Federal Reserve building, and of course we have seen jihad in terms of the Fort Hood jihad. We have a president who has, by policy, by national policy, scrubbed jihadic doctrine and Islam from all counterterrorism materials, which is why the Fort Hood jihad was designated workplace violence. Here you have a devout Muslim who's wearing the garb of the Shaheed on the morning of his jihad, who's giving out Qurans on the morning of his jihad, who is screaming Allahu Akbar, which means Allah is greater. Greater than what? Greater than your God. It's a supremacist declaration. And that's workplace violence. He slaughters 13, arguably 14 Americans, because one woman was 5 months pregnant. And so there's that aspect. That's easy to see, even though the media doesn't report on it.
Well, but they don't report on a lot of things, such as slayings in New Jersey or this one last week in Oklahoma. Talk to us a little bit about those and whether or not you believe there's a tie to jihad on those either.
Again, it's like the honor murders in this country, where young girls who want to live a more Western life are honor murdered, whether it's Sarah Mina Saeed or Noor al-Maliki. We see these instances where it's covered up and it's called, you know, domestic violence. It's not. It's rooted in an honor code. The 2 Christians who were beheaded last year in New Jersey by a devout Muslim who, cut off their hands, which is also a Quranic verse, and their heads. More specifically was the case of Yakim Yisrael in Oklahoma. Here you have, now I took screenshots of his entire Facebook page, a devout Muslim citing Quran chapter and verse on his entire page. He's running pictures of beheadings in process, the hacking with a 6-inch knife, tying it to Quranic verse 47:4, when you meet the unbeliever, smite them at their neck, and media's not talking about it, and it becomes even more absurd, lethally absurd, when it comes out via my colleague and partner at AFDI, Robert Spencer, has an informant in the mosque who is telling about the advancing of the caliphate, teaching of the caliphate in the mosque, teaching of hatred of the U.S., teaching of hatred of Israel. And you have the President of the United States send an envoy to the mosque to thank them, giving them a thank you note and a note of appreciation.
Not before, but after the beheading.
Right after the beheading, when what he should have done was started an investigation into this mosque and all mosques. According to not 1 but 3 studies in the past 10 years, over 80% of the mosques in America are teaching, preaching, or advancing jihad. 67% of the Quran is dedicated to the non-believer, the non-Muslim. There is a problem in Islam, and the problem is we can't talk about the problem. I don't care if you worship a stone, just don't stone me with it. The idea that the Sharia, now understand something about the Sharia. The Sharia is Islamic law. Jewish law pertains only to Jews. Canon law pertains only to Catholics. The Sharia, Islamic law, dictates every basic aspect of human life, daily human life. And here it is. Here's the money quote. Asserts its authority over non-Muslims, which is why you see the persecution of Christians and Hindus and Buddhists in Muslim countries across the world. They're forced to live as dhimma. Living in dhimmitude, you are denied basic human rights and forced to pay an exorbitant poll tax called the jizya. So there are 3 choices. That's the 3rd choice. The first choice is convert, the second choice is die, or the third choice is live like a dog.
Right.
And we see this, but there is this willful denial, this willful ignorance across the world, and yet here in the States, you could say, well, that's not happening here in the States. Well, I beg to differ. We see very subtle changes. We see changes in our freedoms. We see changes in our First Amendment. We see the Obama administration's Department of Justice vowed to criminalize postings on social media, Facebook and Twitter, that offended Muslims. That's blasphemy laws. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say you have a right not to be offended. And so, of course, when that vow was made by William Killian, the DOJ attorney, and he was making this declaration at a outreach meeting, Muslim outreach meeting in Tennessee, we called a protest. And in this small town of Manchester, Tennessee, 10,000, population 10,000, we had 2,000 people there. So that stopped. We nipped that in the bud. You can. In America, we still have a voice, and this is what people really need to know, that you can make a difference. Now, they're going to go about it in a different way. Now we understand there's a federal program called Truthy, where they're going to monitor all social media for hate speech. Now, what is hate speech? Hate is in the eye of the beholder. I don't believe in any of that. You know, the hate crime legislation, that was wrong. That was wrong under Bush, and I would hope that the next rational president would repeal it, because all crime is hate. The idea that you're assigning a thought crime to it, because that's what hate crime is, the thought behind the crime, is wildly dangerous. Who decides? I mean, this was the whole premise of the First Amendment, and why it's the First Amendment and not the Eighth and not the Ninth. The first, that freedom of speech above all rights is the most fundamental, and the most protected speech is political speech. Not just for ideas that we like, that's easy, but for ideas that we don't like. Because then who would decide what's good or what's forbidden?
Right.
The government? These Muslim Brotherhood groups that are demanding the imposition of quote-unquote hate speech laws, when in fact what they really are the laws of the Sharia. You cannot criticize Islam. You cannot offend Islam. And it's very, very dangerous. You see the mosquing of the workplace, imposing Muslim prayer times on, non-Muslim workers. We see the Common Core curriculum where they're literally proselytizing to the kids in school. It's all very subtle. Many, many, many demands. And anywhere American law and Islamic law conflict, it's American law that has to give way. We see these lawsuits. Muslims suing Walmart and suing Target for not wanting to handle meat that's not halal. You don't want to handle meat that's not halal, don't work it, work at a halal butcher. I mean, don't work at Walmart and Target. But they sued and they won. Disney's being sued because a worker wanted to wear the hijab. And Disney said, well, you can't wear it on the floor. We have a dress code here since 1957. So you can work in the back. No, I want to be on the floor. So Disney said, okay, and they designed a costume incorporating the hijab. And the complainant said, I'm not wearing that ridiculous costume. I don't know which costume she was referring to, hers or theirs, but the fact is, it is a way of imposing Islam on the secular marketplace. And one only has to look at what's happening in Europe to see where we're headed. There are no-go zones. Police cannot go into Muslim areas. They're ambushed. They're fired upon. I just yesterday did a piece on this very thing happening in Denmark, but it's happening across the board. And of course, Jews are fair game because Islamic Jew hatred is in the Quran. Mm-hmm. It's a religious imperative. This is something else I never understood. I never understood the hatred of Israel. But the fact is, it has nothing to do with land. The very existence of Israel is offensive to devout Muslims.
Right. And the map makers from that part of the country or from that part of the world will often accidentally or deliberately leave Israel off the map altogether.
Of course. And it's interesting that after the Ottoman Empire, now the Ottoman Empire was the caliphate, was defeated by the British. The British literally just cut up the Middle East. Okay, give me a ruler. Here's Iraq, here's Syria, here's Jordan. Nobody has a problem with any of those lines. But this teeny tiny Jewish nation surrounded by enormous Muslim lands is, the cause of all of this hatred. It's very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. And so some of the things you talked about, Nazism, and you've talked about Islam and that kind of thing, some of the things that you work on as part of AFDI are relatively controversial. You're known for a few things, ads being one of them. You brought a couple of ads with you this evening, and you said that they've already started to get traction on the controversy scale in other parts of the country, and some of them are going to be coming to the Bay Area. Could you spend a couple of minutes talking about the ads that you've been running and why they've been so controversial?
Well, truth is the new hate speech. Truth is controversial. That's where we are. That's the low state of the world that we are in. My ads are merely the truth. The ad campaign, this latest brouhaha, much of my ad campaigns cause a stir. It's not my intent. You know, I'm accused of being, you know, an agent provocateur, and, you know, if only. What I'm attempting to do is leapfrog over this machine of disinformation in the information battle space. We're at war. We're at war in the war of ideas. We're at war in the information battle space, and all the bullets and the bombs and the bloodshed comes as a result of what happens in this war. And we're at a distinct disadvantage because the media is aligned with the Jihad force. I don't even call them the media, I call them the enemy-media. They are the enemy because, look, they're always going to be evil people, okay? But once you align with them and you demonize those that are fighting for freedom and fighting for good, well, then, you know, the whole ball game has changed. And so the attempt that, what I'm doing with the ads, what I'm attempting to do, is to leapfrog over the media and the campaign of disinformation, dissembling, and out-and-out lies, and talk directly to the information consumer. Mm-hmm. So in this recent campaign, I'm trying to explain that the way the media approaches jihad is they talk about Hamas, and they'll talk about Hezbollah, and they'll talk about the Islamic State, and they'll talk about Mujahideen. It's like you wake up with red dots all over your face, and you go to the dermatologist, and the dermatologist treats every single dot differently. No, it's the chicken pox. And this is the campaign. One of the ads is Hamas is ISIS, Hamas is Al-Qaeda, Hamas is Hezbollah, Jihad is jihad. It's jihad. Every group is using the same playbook, every group is citing the same Quranic chapter and verse, and you see Boko Haram has pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. You see the Pakistan Taliban has pledged allegiance. The Uzbek Jihad has pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. It's this incredibly, these mental gymnastics that the media is going through. It's not that difficult. This is a global movement. And this is not explained to the American people ever. And that's what that ad seeks to do. And in another ad that I think caused the most controversy was the moderate ad. It says yesterday's headline is yesterday's moderate is today's headline. And it shows the picture of a young man. He's a musician, he's in the studio, he has his Dr. Dre headphones on, he's mixing. This is before he became devout. And there's a picture of him after he became devout, and he's standing over James Foley, you know, about to behead him. Now, we have literally thousands of young Muslims from Europe, from America, from Canada, from Australia, flocking to the Middle East to wage jihad. Many were born in the West, in Europe, in the UK, in America. Many are very affluent. Many went to private schools. So this whole idea about they're disaffected and it's poverty and they're illiterate, it's a big, and we hear Kerry, Secretary of State Kerry say that all the time, it's not true. What is the common thread? The common thread is piety. Devout Islam. Now, that may be an unpleasant fact, but that's the fact. It's not poverty. And the 9/11 hijackers weren't poor. And the Muslims that wanted to blow up the airport in Scotland, they were doctors. So what is the common thread? Why can't we talk about the ideology? I mean, people are so upset with these ads saying they're anti-Muslim. No, the people that say they're anti-Muslim are painting all Muslims with a broad brush. Clearly, they're moderate Muslims. They're not the problem. If I ran an anti-Nazi ad in 1942, would we have heard, oh, you're painting all Germans with the same brush? Not all Germans were Nazis. But there was a problem, and there's a problem now.
Right. And that tie of Nazism and Islam is another thing that's been controversial for you on one of your ads recently.
Yes, that's very true. Because one of the ads, as a matter of fact, we are suing San Francisco because they wouldn't run the ad. It shows a picture of Hitler during World War II meeting with his ally, the Mufti al-Husseini. The Mufti al-Husseini was the leader of the Muslim world. He lived on Hitler's dime in Berlin from 42 to 45. He was responsible for the death of 400,000 Jewish women and children. He waged jihad in the cause of Nazism in Iraq, in the Middle East, but failed against the British and Jewish soldiers. And San Francisco MTA wanted me to remove Hitler, as if he's a character in history. He's a historical figure, right. and we defeated him. What do we have to be afraid of? What are we afraid of?
And it wasn't like you photoshopped him into the picture.
Oh, no. It's a meeting of the Mufti and Hitler. And the fact is, the point of that ad, by the way, was to show that this has nothing to do with 1967 and the Palestinian borders, that it's Islamic Jew hatred that fuels the jihad against the Jewish state, that this was going on long before 67. This was going on long before the establishment of Israel in 1948. Before that, it was Palestine. Palestine is Israel. Palestine is Israel. Palestinian Muslims were conducting pogroms against Palestinian Jews. So there's a big lie, and what these ads attempt to do is blow up the lie with an ad. I mean, so you know, you can't use a lot of text.
Right. It's a bus ad.
It's a bus ad. But you want people to get curious. And if they go to IslamicJewHatred.com or IslamicAntisemitism.com, there is literally hundreds of texts, Islamic texts and teachings, Quranic verse, calling for the annihilation of the Jews. And when you hear Fatah and Hamas calling against the jihad against Israel, they're citing Quran chapter and verse.
Right. Well, so those are two websites that they can go to. We're running a little bit close to the end of our segment. Where else can people find out more information about you and about AFDI if they're interested?
My website is updated 15 times a day with, again, jihad-related news in America and abroad. That's PamelaGeller.com or AtlasShrugs.com. If you want to support the ads, you can go to AFDI.us, because our ads are paid for by individuals, by freedom lovers who want to preserve our basic unalienable rights, which are literally being encroached upon every day. And with the advent of this global jihad, we are facing a very grave and imminent threat, and I can't overstate that.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing your passion this evening. If you hold on for just a moment, we'll be right back after a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
The Conservative Forum of Silicon Valley began with 20 conservatives meeting at a restaurant in November of 2003. Our mission is to promote the principles of American liberty through education. By 2012, we had grown to over 600 paid members. Our monthly meetings feature well-known and prestigious conservative speakers addressing issues that are critical to our country's very survival. This includes speakers like Victor Davis Hanson, Andrew Breitbart, David Horowitz, and many others. In addition to our monthly meetings, we sponsor a conservative local cable access TV show, The Right Side, covering today's topics. Our Constitution discussion group not only teaches the Constitution, but started our annual essay contest that awards 2 $1,000 scholarships to local high school seniors. We are a virtual clearinghouse for grassroots organizations by providing them with table space at no charge in our exhibit area. There are typically a dozen groups represented. If you are like-minded, join us at our next meeting and become motivated and empowered. Liberty, made in America.
And welcome back to The Right Side. That was a word from our underwriter, the Conservative Forum. Now, as we often say, after thanking them profusely for allowing the show to occur, this is actually not the reason they're best known. The Conservative Forum is best known for their speaker series, which was the reason we were able to have Pamela on the show this evening. She'll be speaking this evening at 7:30 at the IFES Portuguese Hall at 432 Steerland Road here in Mountain View. And in coming months, November 11th, James O'Keefe, founder of Project Veritas, will be on stage. December 9th, Adam Gillette, Director of Development and Outreach for the Motion Picture Institute, will be with us. January 13th, Bill Whittle will be returning from PJ Media. In March, Dennis Michael Lynch, producer of They Come to America. And in May, we're looking forward to Alan West gracing us with his presence. And so if you'd like to know more about the events happening at the Conservative Forum, you can check theconservativeforum.com. Now, if you have more interest in the things that Pamela spoke about this evening, as she stated, you can go to PamelaGeller.com, learn more there, or AtlasShrugs.com, and really get a feel for what is the jihad threat, not just in the United States, but around the world. And judge for yourself whether or not it's something that, first of all, you believe to be real, but second of all, whether or not you believe it to be the threat that Pamela and many others around the world who've come face to face with this radical form of Islam have experienced day after day, and in many cases for centuries. Learn more there at AtlasShrugs.com. And if you have feedback for us, you can also reach us to email us directly at therightsidetv@gmail.com. We thank you for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you again either in person or on the show in coming months, and have a great evening. Again, I've been your host, Chris Pareja, and this has been The Right Side.